folksy friend, and on this channel I talk about stories, in particular folk tales, beliefs, and mythologies. On Tuesdays we talk Tolkien, and today is Tuesday, so let's go. After awakening in Middle Earth, years of torment by Melkor, and a grueling journey across the world, the elves have finally begun to settle down. They're out of immediate danger because Melkor has been sentenced to prison for 3 ages, and his remaining followers are mostly in hiding. Most of the elves took part in the Great Journey and made it to Valinor, the beautiful, magical home of the Valar. However, there are still some groups scattered across Middle-earth. Let's begin with the elves in Valinor, and quick recap. There are 3 groups. The Vanyar, led by their king, Ingwe, who is the smallest group, the Noldor, led by Finwë, who are the most ambitious group, and the Teleri, now led by Aule, the brother of their first king, who was left behind in Middle-earth. More on him to come. The Teleri are the largest group, and they left many elves behind as they traveled through Middle-earth. While the Vanyar and Noldor live in Valinor itself, the Teleri live on an island just outside Valinor. Now the Vanyar and Noldor in Valinor start to miss the light of the stars. Starlight is very important to elves. It was the first thing they ever saw, and the tall mountains called the Pelori that encircle Valinor make it impossible to see any light other than the light of the 2 trees, kind of like magic light pollution. So the Valar create a gap in the mountains and raise up a hill in front of the gap. The mountain pass was named the Calasirca, or Pass of Light, because the light of the trees spilled through into the sea, and even reached the edge of Tol Eressea, the island of the Teleri. Where the light reached their island, it became lush and green, like the land in Valinor, and there bloomed the first flowers east of Aman. Aman being the continent, while Valinor is the place specifically where the Valar live. From the top of the hill, which is named Tuna, the Vanyar and Noldor could see out into the sea and up into the stars, and they chose to build their city on this hill. The city was named Tirion. The streets were gold and stairs made of crystal. The highest point was the Tower of Indon Eldaliva, where their high king, Ingwe, lived. The elves had a great love for Telperion, the silver tree, so Yavanna made a mini version of it for their city, but it couldn't create its own light in the same way that Telperion could. This tree was named Galathylion, and it was the ancestor to the white tree of Gondor. For many years, the Vanyar and the Noldor lived in peace and friendship. The Vanyar were most loved by the king and queen of the Valar, Manwë and Varda. They spent a lot of time together, sharing their thoughts and ideas. The Noldor were most loved by Aule, the Valar of crafting and smithing. The Noldor had a thirst for knowledge, and Aule loved sharing what he knew. They became skilled smiths and explored much of Valinor. They created new words for things that they saw and created and imagined. During their explorations, while mining stone for Tirion, they actually found the very first gemstones and learned how to craft with them. They shared their creations, their skills, their knowledge, and it enriched all of Valinor. The Teleri on their island were beloved by Osse. Osse was a Maya who served Ulmo. He had become close to the Teleri while they were still in Middle-earth, and had not wanted them to go to Valinor in the first place. He was also the reason why they stayed on Tol Eressea instead of going into the mainland of Aman. As time passed, they became increasingly drawn to the light and wanted to go into Valinor. So the Valar had Ulmo instruct Osse to help the Teleri get across the water. Reluctantly, Osse taught the elves how to build ships. When they had enough for all of them, Osse gifted the Teleri with a flock of swans to pull them across the water. Once they arrived on the mainland, the Teleri went and spent time with the Noldor, who had always been their closest friends. Then they spent time walking around the coast, having still a great love for the ocean. The Noldor gifted them gems, the Teleri found pearls, and they scattered them across the tidal pools. On the coast, north of the Calasirca, the Teleri built the city of Alqualonde. Their great halls, including the king's mansions, were made of pearl, and the city was lit by many lamps. The city's harbor was gated by a natural stone arch and housed the Teleri's ships. The fleet they built were modeled after Osse's swans, with beaks of gold and eyes of gold and jet. Ages pass, and over time, the Vanyar become drawn to be closer to Manwë and Varda. So they leave the city of Tirion, and they actually move onto the slopes of Taniquetil, which is the tallest mountain in the Pelori range. And Ingwe himself goes up to the top where Manwë and Varda live to live among them. Even though he is separated from the Noldor and the Teleri, who still live down in Valinor, he is still considered their high king. The Noldor and Teleri continue to live in friendship. The Noldor expand their knowledge even more and create an alphabet. Their lore master, Rumil, was the first to begin writing down their speech and songs. The Noldor also spend a lot of time traveling, especially Finwë's family, but their home is still in Tirion, while the Teleri live in Alqualonde. So now I'm going to go into the chapter of the Sindar. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the book, but chronologically what I'm going to talk about now is happening at the same time as what I just talked about in Valinor. Back in Middle Earth, most of the elves were in the west, in Beleriand. Some, who never even tried to make it to Valinor, were still in the east, but we don't really know what they were up to. To the west, there were three main groups, all of which had broken off from the Teleri. The Nandor, who had gone south down the river Anduin and were still in the east of the Misty Mountains, away from the rest of them. The Eglath were still searching for their king, Elwë, in East Beleriand. And there were the Falathrim, who Ose had convinced to stay on the coast. Falathrim meaning of the Falas, Falas meaning coast. Of these elves, they were all considered to be Moriquendi, elves of darkness who never saw the light of the trees, except one. Elwë had been the king of the Teleri. During the great journey, he had gone deep into the forest of Non-Elmoth, and there he had met Melian. Melian is one of the Maiar who had crossed over into Middle-earth long before the awakening of the elves. Elwë had seen her and fallen into a trance. When he took Melian's hand, a spell had been cast over them both and frozen them in place. At the end of the journey across the sea for the Teleri, when their island had been fixed in place outside of Aman, that was when Elwë awoke from the trance. The Eglath, his people, were overjoyed and a little overwhelmed because Elwë had changed. He now looked more like a Maya than an elf. He had grown taller, more beautiful, and his hair had become a shining silver gray. They gave him the name Elu Thingol, meaning King Greymantle. He had grown stronger from the magic Melian lent him, and the elves could tell that Thingol had a powerful destiny. Together, Thingol and Melian had become the king and queen of the elves of Middle Earth in the west. These elves became known as the Sindar, the elves of twilight. They lived in the still sleeping forests of Middle Earth. Remember, Yavanna had put a sleep over the plants and animals of Middle Earth, so nothing is growing at this time. At the end of the first age of Melkor's imprisonment, Melian gives birth to a daughter, Luthien. Luthien was the most beautiful of any elf to ever exist. When she is born, flowers bloom beneath her, the first flowers in Middle Earth. Time passes, and during the second age of Melkor's imprisonment, the first dwarves come into the west and meet the elves. The elves called these new creatures the Naugrim. The dwarves called themselves the Khazad. The Khazad had been traveling across the land, building cities in the mountains. They finally made it to the Blue Mountains and built 2 cities, then began traveling from there into Beleriand. Now the elves are pretty shocked to be seeing intelligent life. They thought that they were the only creatures in Middle Earth with intelligence that could speak using language. They had named themselves the Quendi, meaning those who speak with voices. But even though the dwarves could speak, the species could not understand each other. The elves thought that the Dwarven language was unpleasant and refused to learn it. But the dwarves took the higher road here. They learned Sindarin so that they could communicate with the elves. And although the elves did not go into the Dwarven cities in the Blue Mountains, the dwarves built a road into Elven land so that there could be communication and trade. Sometime after the coming of the dwarves, Melian sensed that the current peace in Middle Earth was not going to last. She told Thingol about her fears and told him they needed a safe, kingly home to live in. Thingol reached out to the dwarves, knowing that they were unmatched in their ability to craft and build. The dwarves took payment of pearls and wisdom from Melian and began building a great underground home for Thingol. The mansions of Thingol were named Menegroth. the Thousand Caves. Elf and dwarf craftsmanship made Menegroth the most beautiful dwelling of any in history, east of Valinor. And for a time after the building of Menegroth, there is peace and tranquility throughout Middle Earth. So the elves in Valinor had Tirion and Alqualonde, the elves in Middle Earth had Menegroth. And the 3 ages of Melkor's imprisonment continued to pass in peace. However, as Melian knew, the peace was not going to last. But before I can go into any of that, I will need to go over one of, if not maybe the most important families in Elven history, and that is the House of Finwë. So join me next week when I will go over Finwë, his children, and their children. I hope you enjoyed spending some time with me here today as I talked about Tolkien. If you did, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Always looking for ways to improve, so if you have suggestions, please tell me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.